So one of the things they did was what they called the homosemantic translation. This is a translation that takes place within a single language, but you have to change the form of the language. So they would take a famous piece of prose or poetry in, say, English, something like Hamlet's speech, and that's written in iambic pentameter. And they would say, okay, now, let's rewrite that, still in English, but let's do it in blank verse. So it still has to be poetic, but it can't be structured. So then they'd rewrite that. So what I now ask, should I live or no? And so that has a lot of poetic elements. It has some inversions of the standard noun-verb order. It has some inversions of how you compose grammatical phrases. And it has fancy punctuation. So it's poetry. And they said, okay, now, let's go and let's do it prose, right? So prose is less flowery than poetry. It's a little duller, but it should be very straightforward and it should get right to the point. What I have to decide is going on living worth it? That's prose, same question. And they were inspired by mathematicians, so they often went a little further and they said, okay, let's translate that into math. And so they would write it down as an equation, right? So if the variable x is set to man, and the variable y is set to afterlife, is it better that I am a man or that I'm in the afterlife? They also did other translations. Homolexical, you have to keep the same words. And it has to make grammatical sense after you rearrange it. So this is a rearrangement. So the question to be that is not to be or, with the quotes, making those sub-quotations actually nouns that then can be operated on. Antonymic translations, you have to take every grammatical piece of the sentence and invert it. Take its opposite. So to be is to not be. Or becomes and, not to be becomes to be, that becomes this, is, was, the, and, question, answer. And so you get to not be and to be, this was an answer. One of their favorites, and this was the only translation they did that was between languages, was the homophonic translation between languages. You have to translate something into a different language so that as it is spoken, it sounds as close to the original in the other language as possible and is grammatically correct. So if you took a French sentence, le vierge, le vivace, et le bel aujourd'hui, you could translate that into English, le vierge, le vivace, hail belle, assuredly, which is what they thought was the closest grammatically correct English sentence that sounded like the French. And one last of their games was the N+7 game. The N+7 game, they took a famous piece of prose and they ripped out all of the nouns. Then they went to a dictionary and they counted 7 nouns from each noun and they put that new noun back in. So if you take a very, very, very large dictionary, Oxford English, 7 nouns in a dictionary so large is not very far away in spelling from the noun you took out. So you're probably close in meaning. So if you take Genesis and a very large dictionary, you get something which has almost the same sense. In the beginage, rather than the beginning, God created the, not heavens, but Hadamad. And of course, heavens is H-E-A-V. So it's almost at the end of the H-E-A. So it's not surprising that we have to go H-E-B, and we change the meaning. But if you take a medium-sized dictionary, then God created the heckelphone and the easement and so on. And if you take a pocket dictionary, you get something completely different. But it sounds very profound. In the men, God created the hen and the education was without founder. Now, how many of us in education feel that education is without founder? destroyed, and death was upon the falsehood of the demand, socialism, right? And the sport of God moved upon the falsehood of the wealth, socialism again. And God said, let there be limit, and there was limit. You know, it's actually a little bit like Jesus with the moneylenders. Now, one of their prominent authors wrote this. This is the first page of a novel that one of the Oulipo wrote, and I'm wondering if you can spot what the formal restriction is here that they're writing within. There's something abnormal about this paragraph. And it's not that there are too many commas. Does anyone spot it? I should mention that this is actually the English translation of a book that was written actually in French. This is the book. And the title tells you, I mean the cover tells you, there's no E. He wrote this in French. It's 300 pages long. It was translated into English without the letter E. So this entire book has no E's. And as you can read here, it's not senseless. It actually reads fairly comfortably. So this is a real achievement, right? And this is one of the heights of the Oulipos, to impose such intense restrictions that you'd think you couldn't do it. French and English use E so much, right? Pardon? Yeah, actually, if you look at cryptographic tables for cracking French codes, E is actually more frequent than English. But to translate it from English into French and keep that restriction is amazing.